Suddenly, it dawned on me like a cartoon light bulb flickering to life above my head. The realization hit hard. My third child wasn't biologically mine, she belonged to another man. I was deep in conversation with a genealogygurus.com representative, trying to figure out why my daughter's DNA test results hadn't arrived after 10 weeks. I had given her the test as an extra Christmas present and provided the representative with all the necessary details. After a brief 5-minute wait, he returned to confirm that the test had indeed been processed but cited privacy policies that prevented him from disclosing more information related to the test submitter. But if the test has been processed, why isn't she showing up in my DNA matches? I asked, my frustration growing. Sir, there are various reasons why your daughter might not appear in your matches, but I can't discuss specifics due to privacy constraints, he replied, his tone tinged with frustration. And then it hit me. The simplest explanation was that she wasn't my biological match. I ended the call in a daze, pressing the red end call button before collapsing in tears. The next thing I knew, I was waking up in a fetal position on the family room floor. With 15 minutes left on my lunch break, I decided to call my daughter, assuming she might also be on hers given we work in the same time zone. Knowing she usually spent her break curled up with a book at her desk, I wasn't too concerned about interrupting her. She picked up on the first ring. "Hey Dad, what's up?" she greeted me, a hint of caution in her voice. "Pumpkin, you know I love and trust you completely, but I know about the DNA test," I bluffed. "I called Genealogy Gurus and they told me it was processed about 2 weeks ago." There was a sharp intake of breath on her end, followed by a tense silence that stretched for at least 10 seconds. "I know, Dad. We need to talk, but I can't do this here and now. Call me tonight and make sure Mom isn't around when you do." As I drove back to the office, my mind was in a fog. I have to admit, my productivity that afternoon at the engineering firm where I worked was far from stellar. My thoughts were a whirlwind of questions and worries, chief among them the unsettling notion that my little girl might not be mine after all. Being the analytical type, I knew I had to prioritize my thoughts and tackle the problems one at a time. I didn't become a vice president of engineering at Johnson Electronics for nothing. I decided to approach my personal issues the same way I handled project challenges, methodically and systematically. Michael Johnson, the old man himself, had instilled this mindset in me when he hired me straight out of Purdue University to work for his then-fledgling company. With Michael at the helm and me by his side, Johnson Electronics had grown into an industry leader, and we both reaped the rewards. I earned a substantial income, enjoyed excellent benefits, and worked alongside exceptionally talented colleagues. Life couldn't get much better when I returned home each day to a beautiful, loving wife and our 3 wonderful children. As time went by, the kids grew up, moved out, got married, and started families of their own. Initially, being empty nesters felt a bit lonely, but we found many ways to stay busy, and it seemed like this phase rekindled our bond as a couple. Reflecting on the past month, a few seemingly minor incidents now stand out, particularly a phone call Mia made to my wife about 2 weeks ago. We were both in the family room watching TV on a Tuesday evening when Haley's phone rang. She glanced at the screen, mentioned it was Mia, and answered the call. The conversation was brief, lasting about 5 minutes, with Haley mostly responding with simple yes and no answers. I couldn't help but notice tears forming in her eyes after the call ended. I asked if everything was all right. Haley mentioned that Mia's cat was having some health issues but assured me there was nothing to worry about. Although she seemed somewhat uneasy around me, it struck me as odd that she was taking the cat's health so personally. That phone call must have been when Mia found out. Haley had no idea I had sent Mia a DNA test kit. I didn't think it was a big deal. Among our 3 children, Mia was the only one interested in genealogy, so I ordered a kit online and sent it to her. I've been exploring our family roots intermittently for years and found DNA testing particularly fascinating. I thought Mia would find it exciting too. Apparently, I couldn't have been more wrong. When I got home, I made an effort to act normally around Haley, even though I was seething inside. I kept repeating to myself, one problem at a time, one problem at a time. I met Haley at Purdue during my sophomore year, although we didn't start dating until senior year. Once we did, I believed we were inseparable. We got married a year after graduating, minus 31 years ago, and until today, I would have said it was the best decision of my life. At 54, she remains beautiful, and despite having 3 children, she stays in shape with the figure of someone in their mid-30s. She is both fun and funny, and until today, I looked forward to spending the rest of my life with her. Around 8 o'clock, I told Haley I needed to call the old man about a project and excused myself. I grabbed a jacket and stepped outside to the porch swing for some privacy. Then I called Mia. Maya answered on the first ring, sounding absolutely distraught. "I'm sorry, Dad. I know I should have told you earlier, but Mom asked me to wait until she talked to you first," she blurted out before I could even say hello. "I'm not mad at you." "Calm down," I replied as soothingly as I could. "I'm not blaming you. You're just as much a victim in this as I am." I could hear her heavy breathing over the phone, knowing how hard this was for her. "Mia, I want you to know that this doesn't change anything between us. I'm still your father, and you're still my pumpkin. I've always given you kids all the love I have, and I'm not about to stop now, unless you want me to." She broke down sobbing, almost incoherently, into the phone. "I love you, Daddy. I don't want anyone else but you. That's my girl. I hate to put you in a tough spot, but you're my best hope for understanding this DNA situation. We'll leave the other issues aside to avoid any conflict. I just need to know, did you find any DNA matches?" "Yeah, Dad, I did," she sighed. "Lily Torres showed up as my half-sister. And Uncle Daniel and Aunt Bella is LYO, holy crap." "I'm sorry, Daddy," she said softly. "It's not your fault, pumpkin. You never need to apologize to me," I reassured her, trying to stay composed. This revelation meant that Daniel Torres, Uncle Daniel to my children, appellate court judge Daniel Torres to everyone else, was Mia's biological father. That implied my wife had an affair with him when he was still with the law firm GUI Howe and Associates. This went back at least 25 years. Considering Mia was 24 years old now, at that time, Haley would have been his administrative assistant. Daniel left the firm a few years later to become a state judge and moved to the capital, where his career really took off. Haley, on the other hand, chose to stay with GUI Howe, eventually becoming the office manager. During the years they worked together, Daniel and his wife Bella became such close friends that our kids called them uncle and aunt, and their kids did the same with us. Several times when I was away on business trips, Haley and the kids would spend days at Daniel and Bella's lake house. The kids had often mentioned Aunt Bella taking them places but never mentioned Uncle Daniel or Haley being with them. I hadn't even thought twice about it. I must have zoned out, because the next thing I knew, Maya was calling me. "Daddy? Daddy, sorry, pumpkin." I got lost in my thoughts. "Thanks for your help, kiddo. Tell Joseph I said hi." "Wait, Daddy, what are you going to do?" It was a fair question, but I didn't have a clear answer, so I told her straight. "I'm not sure, kid." "Well, just don't go and do something incredibly stupid, Dad. A little stupid is fine, but don't get yourself arrested or anything." I hadn't considered shooting Haley until that moment, but I promised Mia I wouldn't get arrested, so that option was off the table. I never break promises to my kids. Reassuring Mia about our relationship was my top priority, followed closely by discovering who Haley's accomplice was. The third task was initiating the divorce process by finding a new attorney, since my current one was with the same firm Haley worked at. That arrangement was clearly untenable. Once I secured a reliable lawyer, I'd tackle the issue of the future ex-Mrs. Clark Miller. At home, the atmosphere was frosty whenever we were together. Haley chattered incessantly, possibly from nerves. She seemed to be putting in extra effort to keep me happy, maybe hoping to soften the blow when I eventually found out. Who knows? But there was a palpable distance between us, and she certainly wasn't going to break the ice. I met with an attorney about a week later. When he learned my wife was the office manager at GUI Howe, he looked visibly uncomfortable. So I moved on to the next one on my list, a confident young woman in her 20s who just smiled when I mentioned Haley's position at GUI Howe. That's exactly the kind of unflinching attitude I needed, someone who wouldn't be intimidated when one of GUI Howe's top attorneys stepped in to represent my wife. I began recounting what little I knew about the cheating debacle, starting with the bombshell discovery that my youngest child wasn't mine biologically and belonged, in fact, to Judge Torres. Appellate Court Judge Torres, asked my attorney, Avery Young. Yes, the very same. I confirmed, watching her expression closely to see if I needed to find new legal counsel. This should be interesting, she remarked before directing our attention towards breaking down the financials. Given that both my spouse and I had stable jobs with pensions and solid benefits, Avery recommended a straightforward approach: divide the joint assets equally, keep our respective pensions, and sell a house. This would leave both parties in a comfortable position, though I would fare slightly better due to my higher income and superior pension. Unless, of course, you want to really press her on the grounds of infidelity, the paternity issue, or her general disrespect, she added swiftly, looking momentarily like she was ready to leap onto the conference table to right the wrongs done to me. We'll have our reckoning, but I don't intend to hurt her financially, I replied. And what about the judge? Are we aiming to pursue anything there that could get complicated and significantly increase your costs? Avery pointed out. The judge is my responsibility. I'll handle him in my own way, I snapped, possibly a bit too harshly. Understood, she replied. If she doesn't contest it, this could be over in 6 months, Avery noted. If she does, we might be looking at more than a year. I don't have any plans requiring a quick resolution, so take the time you need to get it right, I told her. With that out of the way, it was time for the next task, the confrontation. I waited another week, hoping Tracy's head might explode in the meantime. Saturday night was traditionally our date night, followed by a movie and sometimes in the bedroom. We always went to bed early on Saturdays to make the most of our time together. However, it had been 2 weeks since our last date or any intimacy between us, a result of my inability to get over learning about the affair and Nia. Tracy hadn't even questioned it, an indication she knew I was aware but was very adept at pretending otherwise. But that chapter was nearing its end. I took Haley to a charming French restaurant. We shared a bottle of wine, indulged in delightful desserts, and for the first time in weeks, I saw a genuine smile on her face. Once we returned home, I gently helped her out of her coat, guided her to the kitchen table, pulled out a chair, and uttered those dreaded words, "We need to talk." Haley gave me a tentative half-smile as I poured myself a Jack Daniels over ice. I offered her a drink from the liquor cabinet, but she declined. Placing my glass on the table, I looked straight into her eyes and said, "The floor is yours." It was a long time ago, Clark Daniel, and I haven't slept together in about 20 years. Can't we just leave it as a distant past mistake and move on, she pleaded. I was relieved she didn't try to claim the DNA test was wrong, but her attempt to brush it off as ancient history was hard to swallow. All right, the last time was 20 years ago. But when did it start? How frequently did it happen? And why did it stop? I need to know everything, I pressed. And are both our children biologically mine? I added. No, Clark, Matthew, and Ina are yours. I didn't sleep with Daniel until about a year after Ina was born. The affair lasted for about 3 years initially, but we stopped when Daniel decided to leave the firm and pursue his judicial career. He waited a year after we ended things to go for his first judge position to ensure his background check would be clean. After that, we only made love a few times at the lake house, whenever Bella took the kids out for an afternoon. Bella was unaware at the time, but eventually Daniel told her, and the three of us had a calm discussion where Daniel and I promised there would be no more infidelity. "Why didn't you ever tell me or try to make peace with me? What am I, chopped liver?" I demanded harshly. "I knew I could never tell you. You'd divorce me in a heartbeat, and I couldn't bear that. I loved you." "I still love you," she pleaded. "No, you loved him with all your heart. You gave him up so he could chase his career dreams, knowing I was your backup plan. Maybe you loved me a little then, but you fully knew I adored you and counted on that and our family to get over losing him," I accused. Haley lowered her eyes to her lap. The painful truth hung heavy in the air, and I could see she knew I was right. "And what about Mia? You knew not using protection could have consequences, and it did," I continued incredulously. "I thought that with both of you having brown hair, brown eyes, and light skin, no one would suspect whose child she was. When she came out looking like me, I figured there was no reason for concern until you sent her for that deep DNA test. I honestly had no idea before then," she confessed. "So, this is my fault?" I asked, incredulous. "No, Daniel and I talked about the possibility, but I assured him he didn't need to worry since you and he share similar physical traits. As far as I knew, he was still unaware, but I'm sure LY has informed him by now. I haven't had any contact with him for at least a couple of years, ever since Mia's wedding to Joseph 2 years ago. Well, regardless of what anyone knows, Maya is still mine in my eyes, and that's what I told her. I'm listed on the birth certificate. I raised her, I love her, she's mine. Daniel better not get any ideas, and if he calls, you better set him straight. And by the way, I'm having DNA tests done on the other 2 kids as soon as possible." "Clark," Haley hissed, "I already told you they are yours. And why should I trust you?" I snapped back. Haley was visibly shocked by my sudden lack of trust. It also clearly distressed her that I'd have to explain her infidelity to the other 2 children. No one wants their own kids to see them as unfaithful. "So, how often were you 2 together and where?" "Finish the story for me," I demanded. "We didn't plan this, Clark. It just happened. We spent so much time working together, then became friends, and it developed from there. He was kind, considerate, witty, funny, passionate, you know the man, and we connected deeply. But because we both loved our spouses, we kept it minimal and usually met outside the city. No, we never met here or at his home. That would have been wrong on many levels," she explained. "But that didn't stop you 2 from hooking up a few times at the lake house after the supposed end of the affair while Guinevere was out with the kids," I said loudly, pondering. "No, it didn't," she whispered, "but I swear we haven't been intimate since then, and Bella knows all of this and has forgiven both of you," I asked, shaking my head in disbelief. "Yes, I told you," Haley replied. "I don't think I can," I exclaimed, my voice raw with emotion. "Clark, we know what we did was wrong, but it ended over 20 years ago. You were never hurt by it at the time, so can't we just return to how things were a few weeks ago? You were my loving husband, and I was your loving wife. Nothing has to change." Haley started to cry. Normally, I would comfort her, but this time I felt different. I moved to the family room and turned on the TV, leaving her at the kitchen table. That night we shared the same bed, but for the first time in ages, we didn't cuddle. I kept as much distance as the queen-size bed allowed and stopped her from moving closer when she cried. Her face reflected shock and pain, but I remained indifferent. The next morning, Haley made a nice breakfast. As we ate, I brought up the subject of divorce. The affair was over 20 years ago. You didn't even know about it then. It's in the past. Let's just move on, she nearly screamed. Wrong is still wrong, no matter how long ago it happened, I yelled back. You deceived me, lied to me, cheated on me, and shattered my trust. Those are not issues that expire with time. I got up from the table, leaving half my plate untouched, and went outside to mow the lawn. That would be the last time I spoke to Haley until dinner on Wednesday, when she informed me that Bella Tez would be joining us for the upcoming weekend. I wasn't thrilled about it, but Bella and I shared a deep history and a common experience of betrayal, so I felt I owed her a conversation. Bella arrived at 6 p.m. on Friday after a 2-hour drive from her place, but she didn't bring Daniel with her. Haley had prepared stuffed flank steak with mashed potatoes, and I had picked up a few bottles of Merlot to complement the meal. Our dinner conversation was light and amiable, and afterward, we moved to the family room with our wine glasses in hand, anticipating a more serious discussion. Bella began recounting the affair as if it were a detached history lesson, calm and clinical. However, as she delved deeper, her emotions surfaced, and both she and Haley's eyes welled up with tears. When Daniel confessed about the affair, it had already ended a couple of years prior, and he assured me it would never happen again, Bella said, her voice trembling. I was devastated at first, but as I processed it, I realized that since it was already over when I found out, it didn't hurt as much. Knowing that Haley wasn't after money made it somewhat understandable. Daniel has a magnetic personality, doesn't he? I only learned about Mia a few weeks ago, along with everyone else. I'm really sorry about that, Clark, Bella continued. Bella never mentioned the few times Haley and Daniel met up at the Torres Lake house after the main affair had ended. I wondered if they had even disclosed that to her, but I chose not to bring it up. It amazed me that Daniel, a skilled lawyer, had managed to evoke an almost apologetic tone from Bella regarding his infidelity. Unfortunately for Haley, my response was far from Bella's. I wasn't swayed by her calm demeanor or her words, and I wasn't ready to forgive Haley and Daniel as easily, even if the affair had ended 2 decades ago. I often wonder how my life would have turned out. If I had left him, things would be so different for me and the girls, she shared thoughtfully. People always say to consider if your life would be better or worse without your spouse, and I know mine would have been worse. Thanks for sharing that, Bella. It's definitely something to think about. I had a lot to consider, though, especially since, unlike you, I wasn't told about the affair. I found out completely by accident. Haley knew she was making a mistake when she did it and anticipated my reaction. She thought it best if I remained in the dark and continued living in blissful ignorance. And that's what my life would have been like if it weren't for that test. Now, 20 years later, I discover that my wife had loved another man and was intimate with him, then chose to be with me more out of obligation than love. Is that right, Haley? Haley had remained silent while Bella spoke, sitting calmly but stealing glances at me, gauging my reaction. Aware of her eyes on me, I maintained a neutral expression just to unsettle her a bit. Neither Haley nor Bella was pleased with my response to Bella's story. They exchanged pained looks while I shook my head, went into the kitchen to pour another glass of wine, and returned to switch on the big screen in the family room, signaling that I was done for the night. The women took the hint and moved to the living room, where I could hear their soft murmur after my show ended. I turned off the TV, popped my head into the living room to say goodnight, and headed upstairs to our bedroom. On Saturday, Bella cornered me alone in the family room and insisted we talk, unaware of Haley's whereabouts. I agreed, and we moved to the formal living room, settling into 2 chairs in a corner. Clark, I truly understand her pain. Not forgiving Haley and deciding to divorce her would be a grave mistake for both of you, Bella began, her voice soft. You love her, and she loves you. That should be the heart of it. The past is behind you, and letting it dictate your future would be a tragedy for both of you. If I can forgive Daniel, surely you can find it in your heart to forgive Haley. I honestly don't know if I can, Bella. As I mentioned yesterday, I wasn't told about the affair, you were. She didn't tell me because she knew it was wrong, and I wouldn't have forgiven her back then. Why should I now? She deceived me for 2 decades, hiding her affair all this time. How can I ever trust her again, let alone forgive her? I shook my head and left the room, walking past Haley, who stood in the hallway, her eyes full of apprehension. She knew what Bella and I had discussed. My expression alone told her I wasn't changing my stance. Dinner that Saturday night was a silent affair. The women attempted small talk, but I wasn't interested. I barely spoke 3 words throughout the entire meal. After a quick thank you, I grabbed my jacket and headed out, telling them I'd be at Malone's, my preferred spot for a quiet drink. Arriving at Malone's, I noticed Jane, the bar owner, chatting with some customers in a far corner. Instead of my usual seat at the bar, I chose a solitary table, feeling wretched and apparently looking even worse. Mary, the bartender, brought my usual Crown Black on ice and remarked how I seemed like I had just lost my dog. Not just my dog, just my marriage, I replied with a bitter chuckle. Mary then whispered something to Jane, who promptly made her way over to me, excusing herself from the other customers. She sat down across from me. "All right, Superman, spill," she said. Jane was around my age, a robust woman of Irish descent with a mane of red hair and a freckled face. She was tough as nails, just in case anyone decided to challenge her. Her husband Jake, cooking in the back, was a towering figure at 6 feet 3 inches and 280 pounds, a former Marine drill sergeant. Malone's was generally a peaceful place, but bars can sometimes get rowdy. I remembered one incident where a guy mouthed off to Jane. When she pushed back, he didn't back down. Jake took him out with a single punch and pinned him to the floor until the cops arrived. Jane always called me Superman because my name reminded her of Clark Kent. She used to tell everyone that while I was a nice guy with a good job, they wouldn't want to see me angry. We had a lot of laughs over that. I had been coming into Malone's for 20 years, sometimes with Haley, sometimes alone, sometimes to eat, and sometimes just for a drink. Jane and Jake got to know both Haley and me very well. Jane could read people, me included, like an open book. She was like the sister I never had. "Haley and I are done," I blurted out finally. I hadn't told anyone before, and it felt like a weight was lifted off my chest. I found out she cheated on me with her boss about 20 years ago. Not just once, not just several times, but for 4 years. And my youngest, Mia, turns out she's his. Haley thinks that because it happened so long ago and I didn't know about it at the time, I should just accept it and move on. "That cheating," Jane exclaimed. "How dare she? You're not just going to let her stay, are you? If Jake did that to me, he'd be up on the wall and the guy she cheated with would have his skin tacked up right next to his." It felt good to know Jane agreed. Her common sense, no-nonsense perspective always mattered to me, and if she had thought otherwise, I might have reconsidered my position. "Listen, Superman, it's as much about respect as anything. I loved Haley too, but her deceit wasn't out of love or respect. How could she let you believe another man's child was yours all these years?" I filled Jane in on the details about Mia, noting that Haley claimed she wasn't entirely sure. Jane didn't buy it for a second, pointing out that not getting a paternity test was just a convenient way to avoid the truth. "Has she ever apologized for the affair, or just for hurting you, Dan?" Jane hit the nail on the head. She's never apologized for the affair. I don't think she's even really apologized for hurting me. The only thing she seems sorry for is that I found out. I admit I can't tell you what to do, Superman, but I think it's clear what needs to be done. I'm sorry, Clark, the crown is on me and Jake tonight. The rest of the bottle is yours, and we'll call you a cab when you're ready to go. Hand me your keys. I handed her my keys without hesitation. The cab driver practically carried me into my house around 2 a.m. Haley met us at the door and helped guide me to our bedroom. I collapsed on the bed fully clothed. Haley took off my shoes and socks, and there I slumped, just like that. Late Wednesday afternoon, I received a call from my son at the office. He wanted to discuss the situation with Haley, though he didn't explicitly say it. It was clear that Haley had enlisted the help of the kids to persuade me against the divorce. Typically, my son and I see eye to eye, but I could tell she had influenced him significantly. He was definitely siding with her on this matter. "Dad, divorcing Mom would be the stupidest thing you've done since you wore a leisure suit in the 70s, he attempted a light-hearted approach. "Seriously, Dad, for something she did 20 years ago, which you only found out a few weeks back? This is the woman you said you loved and wanted to spend the rest of your life with just a few weeks ago. Now you're prepared to throw it all away and possibly live the rest of your life alone over a mistake? Seriously, Dad." First of all, Matthew, a mistake would have been what she did the first few times she slept with him. After a few months, it's a decision, not a mistake. And what would you do if you found out Linda was cheating on you? You'd probably lose it. But you didn't catch her. It's been over for 20 years, he countered. The physical act has been over, the deception and lack of respect have continued, I responded coolly. Matthew, I thought you were wise enough to stay out of this and not choose sides, yet you've decided to step in where no child should between their parents. And for what, Matthew? I'm not going to change my mind. I'm the injured party here, and you're just aggravating me. I placed that woman on a pedestal. I worshipped the ground she walked on, and she knew it. She never intended to tell me the truth. And if it wasn't for an accident, I would have gone to my grave worshipping her while she merely saw me as a second choice because the man she truly loved wouldn't marry her. Do I feel used? Absolutely. Dad, don't you think you're overreacting a bit? I asked as I ended the call while he was still talking. When I walked in around 6 p.m., Haley was just about finished preparing what smelled like a delicious meal. Despite her efforts, I told her I wasn't hungry, poured myself a glass of Jack, turned on the TV, and settled into my favorite recliner. Noticing her unhappy expression, she eventually came in and asked me what was wrong. Same crap, different day, I replied. My wife cheats on me for 4 years as a kid with another guy, and now my children are painting me as the villain. Do me a favor, call Ina tonight and tell her not to bother calling me tomorrow unless she wants to be hung up on like Matthew. Haley lowered her gaze. After 31 years together, you'd think she'd know better than to have others upset me on her behalf. What on earth makes you think this divorce isn't inevitable? I demanded, raising my voice. Not only did you cheat on me for 4 years and have his child, but you also replaced me in your heart with him. Can you honestly say you weren't in love with him and that you wouldn't have left me if he had asked you to divorce and marry him? The truth is, you might love me, but you're not in love with me. I've been your safety net, someone you always knew would be there because you own my heart and I'd do anything for you as long as I thought you were mine. You cheated, deceived, and disrespected me, and now you have the nerve to turn our kids against me. That was the final straw, Trace. But no, I won't be cruel. I'm not going to ruin Bella's life or Daniel's pristine career as a judge. I'll file for irreconcilable differences, and we can each keep our retirement accounts, splitting the house and everything else down the middle. Haley's tears flowed rapidly as she got up from her chair. Before she left the room, I added one more thing. You've never apologized for cheating, probably because you're not actually sorry. The only thing you're sorry about is that I found out, isn't it? I spent the rest of the night with my bottle of Jack, seeking its familiar comfort. The following day, I contacted my attorney and asked her to expedite the preparation of the divorce papers. She informed me. I requested that I could review them the next Tuesday, that it would be ready by Wednesday, and Haley could be served by Thursday. I requested that her server come to my house on Friday evening, as I wanted to be present when Haley was served. Next, I reached out to Judge Daniel Torres' office, requesting his admin to ask him to return my call regarding the significant matter. Judge Torres was aware of the reason behind my call, and I was confident he would get back to me promptly. About 2 hours later, Daniel, sounding a bit anxious, returned my call. Understanding the urgency, he preferred not to handle the issue at his office, which I agreed with. We arranged to meet at his house with Bella on the following Saturday at 10 a.m. He was unaware that Haley wouldn't be served the previous night but would likely realize it during my 2-hour drive to his luxurious home. During dinner at Malone's on Saturday night, Haley admitted that Bella had informed her about my meeting with Daniel the next Saturday. She asked if she could accompany me on the drive. "This isn't a social visit, Haley," I replied. "Daniel and I have things to discuss, and you don't need to be there. You should remember that Daniel is an appellate court judge with an excellent reputation. He might even be on the shortlist for Supreme Court justice. Doing something reckless could get you arrested, and you promised not to harm his career, right? You're choosing him over me again," she said, crestfallen. "But don't worry, I'll keep my promise. I won't do anything that might jeopardize his Supreme Court prospects." After updating the old man at the office about my personal situation, I took a couple of hours to meet with my lawyer and review the divorce papers, giving her the green light to proceed. She inquired about my plans concerning Judge Daniel as I was leaving. "Why do you ask?" I said with a wink. "Because I still handle criminal cases and have a feeling you might need a good attorney. Engineers like yourself rarely get emotional, but your methodical approach is somewhat concerning." She handed me her card, and I left the office. The next 3 days flew by thanks to a significant project at work that demanded my full attention. The old man was impressed by my focus despite the personal turmoil. Before leaving on Friday night, I informed him about Haley being served and my upcoming confrontation with Daniel, warning him I might end up in jail. By Monday, he reassured me that he had my back and my bail money. We parted with a handshake. I returned home to the enticing aroma of yet another exquisite meal being prepared by Haley. Lately, she had been going above and beyond, showcasing her culinary talents in an effort to capture my attention. There was no denying she was a fantastic cook. I almost felt a pang of guilt because I knew what awaited us after dinner. Our meal was mostly consumed in silence, as had become our norm over the past few weeks. Nonetheless, I made a point to compliment her cooking. I wasn't an ungrateful jerk after all. After dinner, I helped her clear the dishes. Just as we were about to settle into the family room for our usual television routine, the doorbell rang exactly at 7 o'clock. I knew the visitor wasn't there for me, so I didn't make a move to answer. Haley shot me a curious glance before heading to the door. Standing on the porch was a well-dressed young man who asked if she was Haley Miller. Upon her confirmation, he handed her a manila envelope, declared, "You have been served," and promptly left. Haley stood frozen in place, and I could see her shoulders trembling with silent tears. Gently, I walked past her, closed the front door, and guided her back to the kitchen table. Despite my prior warnings, she looked utterly devastated. We sat in silence for what felt like an eternity but was likely just a few minutes. Eventually, she whispered, "You bastard," before fleeing upstairs to our bedroom. I didn't follow her. The hardest part was over. That night, for one of the few times since our marriage, I didn't sleep in the same bed as Haley. Instead, I retreated to the guest room, though calling it sleep was a stretch. I had made the final break from the woman who, until a few weeks ago, had been the light of my life, my soulmate, my everything. Despite everything that had transpired, we had still shared the same bed, perhaps neither of us wanting to be the one to disrupt that last semblance of normalcy. But now, in my mind, it was truly over. I got up, took a shower, and quietly slipped into the bedroom to gather my clothes, careful not to wake Haley and risk starting something. Without checking if she was awake, I grabbed my things and left. I opted for a casual look, a collared shirt, a decent pair of Levi's, and my custom metal-tipped cowboy boots, which I had made when visiting our son in Dallas. I left earlier than necessary to avoid being late for the meeting. If I arrived too soon, I could always pass the time at a coffee shop, which is exactly what I ended up doing. Promptly at 10, I stood on Daniel and Bella's porch and rang the bell. Bella, looking as beautiful as ever but clearly nervous, opened the door. "I'm sorry it has to end like this," I murmured as she leaned in for a hug. She didn't respond, just took my hand and led me to the den where Daniel's mementos and photos were displayed. Daniel was sitting in his favorite recliner but stood up as we entered. "Hello, Clark." "Hello, Daniel." Bella, now appearing downright scared, quietly exited the room. We stood about 6 feet apart, gazing at each other. Once, Daniel had been like an older brother to me. We were that close. He was 2 years older and about the same size, though 20 years of a comfortable lifestyle had added around 30 pounds to his frame, much of it in his round belly. We had shared dreams and hopes, celebrated together, and fished and hunted side by side. I was proud to call him my friend and admired his rise in the judicial world. But now, standing before me, assessing me with his eyes, he was no longer a friend but a foe, the man who had stolen my wife's love, impregnated her, and destroyed my life. Rage surged through me. "You'll win my wife's heart, you bastard," I shouted, "and you get to keep your spotless reputation because I promised Haley I'd never tell anyone about this, and I keep my promises to her. But you're not keeping your balls." With a sudden burst of anger, I took a quick step forward with my left foot, then planted my right and drove it forward and upward like kicking for a 50-yard field goal, his testicles the target. Daniel reacted even slower than I had anticipated. My metal-tipped boot struck accurately and forcefully. He let out an animalistic yelp and collapsed, clutching himself and squealing like a hunted pig. Bella rushed into the room, saw her husband writhing on the floor, and hurried to his side. He continued to scream in agony beyond any comfort she could offer. She looked at me, distraught. I pulled out my cell phone and dialed 911. "There's been an accident at Judge Daniel Torres's house," I reported. "We need an ambulance at this location." I spun around and headed for the door, but just before I reached it, Bella caught my right arm. Bracing myself for a potential outburst, I was surprised to see a calm expression on her face. She hugged me tightly and whispered, "Thank you. We know what we have to do." I returned her embrace, stepped out of the house, got into my car, and drove home. Comforted by the certainty that the cops wouldn't be coming for me, Bella understood completely and would explain it to her husband when he could think more clearly. The drive home felt liberating, perhaps even more than the swift kick I delivered. After months of having my heart shattered daily, I finally felt free. It was strange, but once I accepted Haley's betrayal, her hold on my heart weakened. I could finally think clearly enough to do what was best for me. It might not have been the ideal solution for everyone involved, but sometimes you have to prioritize your own well-being. After all, that's what others had done for the past 20 years, so why shouldn't I start now? Although a part of me would always love Haley, I wasn't going to dwell on the affair anymore. It was neither my doing nor my choice. It was time to move forward. When I got home, I went down to the basement, grabbed a couple of suitcases, and headed up to our bedroom. Haley, sitting in the family room, followed me upstairs. "So, this is it then?" she asked. "Just like that, 31 years and out the door?" "Haley, I'm sorry that you're so absorbed in yourself that you can't see how you wronged me, how you stole 24 years of my love with your deceit. You can't see it, and probably never will, but I've made peace with it. I don't hate you. I don't even hate Daniel, though right now the poor guy probably thinks so. I'll make my peace with Matthew and Ina sometime in the future. You might consider making your peace with Mia as soon as possible, the poor girl's a mess. Sign the paperwork, Haley, and let's get this done. I'll get the rest of my stuff out of here in the next few days. I don't think we need to talk anymore. If you have anything else to say, I put my lawyer's card on the kitchen table. She stood there in shock, tears in her eyes, but unable to speak. I picked up my suitcases, went downstairs, and loaded them into my car. I went back inside, grabbed a few more belongings, and left. 31 years, just like that, epic. I was wrong. Daniel managed to save one of his treasures after all. It required extensive surgery and months of rehabilitation, but they were able to salvage one of his jewels. I learned about it from Mia, who was contacted by Bella trying to reach me. Bella didn't have my phone number, and the rest of the family refused to inform me. In fact, none of them have spoken to me in the 8 months since it happened, but I've come to terms with it. The official story is that Judge Daniel fell heavily against the corner of his ornate desk in his den, injuring himself severely and then made it worse when he hit the floor. The press called it a home accident to keep it discreet and didn't mention it was a genital injury. He received a lot of sympathetic media coverage, which likely won't hurt his chances for a spot on the Supreme Court shortlist. Haley quickly signed the divorce papers, and the process was finalized last week. The house is scheduled for auction. Since my departure, Haley, Matthew, and Ina haven't reached out to me. It seems I won't be included in the family Christmas dinner, wherever it may be held. Come the new year, the old man will be passing the reins of the company to me as he retires. The agreement stipulates that I manage it for 7 years before I can retire with a generous severance package. By then, he plans to sell the company, and I'll receive 10% of the sale proceeds. I've started to socialize more, easing back into the dating scene after a long marriage. I'm slowly getting used to it again. News of the divorce spread quickly, and several divorced friends have reached out to see if I'm interested. Surprisingly, a couple of Haley's divorced friends also contacted me, expressing surprise at her decision to let me go. I must admit, it was a nice boost to my confidence. I have a promising future ahead, brimming with professional and personal challenges. I've been exploring new hobbies with the extra free time I now have. However, one hobby I've decided to let go of for good is genealogy. I've already traveled down that path. Thank you to everyone who has taken the time to hear my stories today. If you enjoyed them, please consider liking and subscribing if you haven't already. Feel free to share your thoughts on these events in the comments below. Take care.